What if I told you that a simple, humble food, something so ordinary, it would be taken for granted in everyday life, became the difference between life and death for thousands of women during World War II? This isn't a story about soldiers or weapons. It's about survival in the most unexpected way. It's about comfort food and how it played a surprising, life-saving role in the brutal world of German female POWs during the war. Imagine being a woman in a prisoner of war camp. You're already facing the most unimaginable hardships: hunger, disease, separation from family, and a sense of hopelessness that grips every inch of your being. Every day is a battle for survival, each moment bringing new fears. You're given nothing more than meager portions of food that barely fill your stomach. And yet, against all odds, one small, unexpected comfort, something as simple as a bowl of soup or a piece of bread, could become your lifeline. What could possibly make something so ordinary have such an extraordinary impact in a place filled with so much pain and suffering? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. This comfort food, though seemingly insignificant, became a source of connection, survival, and even hope for women trapped in some of the harshest conditions imaginable. They didn't just survive the war. They found ways to keep their spirits alive, all thanks to something as simple as food. Stay with me, because this story is about far more than just nourishment. It's about the power of something so small, it changed the course of survival in one of history's darkest moments. So, what was this unlikely hero that helped these women survive? Let's dive in. The world of German female POWs during World War II was a place where survival required far more than physical strength. It required resilience, ingenuity, and a relentless will to endure. These women, often overlooked in historical narratives, found themselves in conditions so brutal that every day was a fight for life. The stories of their survival are filled with unimaginable hardships, from harsh winters to disease and near starvation. Yet amid the darkness, something as simple as food became their unexpected ally. In the POW camps, survival often came down to the smallest of comforts: a bowl of soup, a piece of bread, or a warm drink. But how could food, something so basic, become the key to their survival? To understand how food became a life-saving force, we first need to understand the reality these women faced. After being captured during the war, German women were taken to Allied POW camps in places like the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union. These camps were overcrowded, often poorly managed, and life inside was grim. While male POWs were typically afforded a certain degree of autonomy or treated according to the Geneva Conventions, women were subjected to a very different reality. They were isolated, underfed, and given little to no medical care. The emotional and psychological toll of captivity was overwhelming. Many of these women were taken away from their homes and families, leaving them uncertain about their loved one's fate. They were also denied the basic rights afforded to their male counterparts, often facing more severe restrictions. This left them vulnerable not only to physical harm, but also to the psychological damage of prolonged isolation and fear. Even more troubling, many women were placed in camps with little regard for their safety, and they endured verbal and physical abuse. The food situation in the camps was dire. Prisoners were given minimal rations, often of substandard quality. A daily meal might consist of watery soup with a few scraps of vegetables, stale bread, and perhaps a small piece of meat. These portions were barely enough to sustain life, let alone maintain health. The lack of proper nutrition led to widespread malnutrition, which in turn made the women more vulnerable to diseases like dysentery, scurvy, and tuberculosis. Without access to adequate food, their bodies became weakened, and survival became a matter of luck. Despite these harsh conditions, food, often in the form of unexpected meals or shared resources, provided a vital emotional and physical connection for the women in these camps. It became a source of hope, a small but powerful means to maintain some semblance of normal life amid the chaos. The act of sharing a meal, even a meager one, was a way for these women to preserve their humanity and their sense of community. One of the most striking aspects of their survival was how food provided an avenue for solidarity among the women. When prisoners found or were given extra food, they often shared it with others. This act of sharing was not just about nourishing the body. It was a way to offer emotional support, to show care, and to build bonds in an environment where kindness was rare. In this sense, food became a symbol of resistance, a way to fight back against the dehumanizing conditions of the camps. These small acts of compassion formed the foundation for resilience, reminding the women that, even in the darkest times, they were not alone. Take, for instance, the story of a group of German women in a POW camp in the Soviet Union. Conditions there were particularly brutal, with food scarce and the winters bitterly cold. Yet, despite these hardships, the women found ways to help one another. When one woman managed to acquire a small loaf of bread, she shared it with the others, knowing full well that the single loaf would not be enough to sustain them for long. But the gesture, the shared experience of eating together, gave the women something far more important than food. It gave them a sense of hope. It reminded them that they could still care for each other, that they were still human despite everything they had endured. This kind of emotional and psychological sustenance was just as vital as the physical food. In times of extreme deprivation, when the body was constantly on the brink of collapse, the mind had to find ways to stay strong. Many of the women in the POW camps took solace in memories of better times. They would remember the food they had eaten before the war: rich stews, fresh bread, and warm drinks. These memories became a form of psychological nourishment, providing them with the strength to push forward even when their bodies were failing them. But it wasn't just about sharing food among the women. There were also moments when they were given unexpected meals by their captors. Sometimes, the Allied forces would send food parcels to the prisoners, or local civilians would offer what little they could spare. These meals, though often small, were moments of relief, providing the women with vital nutrition that helped them stay alive. Even more important, these rare gifts were seen as acts of compassion. They were a reminder that not all hope was lost, that there were still people out there who cared about their well-being, even if their captors didn't. One such example comes from a story told by a woman who survived captivity in a British POW camp. She recalled how, one winter, a shipment of food arrived from the local community. It wasn't much, just a few crates of vegetables, bread, and canned goods, but to the women in the camp, it felt like a lifeline. The food didn't just fill their empty stomachs. It gave them a sense of normalcy, something to hold on to. In the bleakness of war, when so much was uncertain and uncontrollable, the food was a reminder that there was still goodness in the world. This sense of connection through food was especially significant in the context of the psychological trauma the women faced. Many of them had been prisoners for years, subjected to harsh conditions and the constant threat of violence. They had seen loved ones taken away, never to return, and had been forced to endure unimaginable suffering. But even in the darkest moments, the shared act of eating together created bonds that could not be broken by the physical and emotional scars of war. It reminded them that, despite everything, they were still human, still capable of compassion and solidarity. For many of the women, survival wasn't just about enduring the physical hardships of captivity. It was about maintaining their sense of identity, dignity, and humanity in a world that had stripped them of almost everything. Food, in its most basic form, became a symbol of their resistance. It wasn't just about surviving the war. It was about preserving what made them human, about holding on to the memories, the relationships, and the small acts of kindness that made life worth living. In a sense, the simple food shared among the women in the POW camps became a form of resistance. It was an act of defiance against the cruelty they were subjected to, a way of maintaining their dignity and humanity in a world that sought to strip them of both. The sharing of food, whether a small morsel of bread or a bowl of soup, became a quiet rebellion against the forces that try to break them. It was a reminder that, even in the face of extreme deprivation, the human spirit could not be easily crushed. In the end, the role of food in the survival of these women goes beyond its nutritional value. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the ways in which people find strength in the smallest, most unexpected of things. For these German female POWs, food wasn't just a necessity. It was a means of survival, a way to resist the forces that sought to break them, and a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, compassion and solidarity could still flourish. So, as we reflect on these stories, it's important to remember that survival during wartime is not just about the will to live. It's about the connections we form, the small acts of kindness we share, and the humanity that endures, even in the face of unimaginable hardship. The comfort food that helped these women survive was more than just a meal. It was a symbol of their resilience, their strength, and their unyielding will to survive. The role of comfort food in survival is often underestimated. In times of crisis or hardship, food is not just a source of physical sustenance, but also an emotional anchor, offering a fleeting sense of normalcy and a vital psychological boost. For German female prisoners of war, POWs, during World War II, the experience of food transcended the physical act of eating. It became a form of resistance, a crucial part of their survival strategy. Amidst the constant threat of starvation, disease, and dehumanization, food had an undeniable emotional power that shaped these women's resilience in ways that went beyond the simple act of feeding the body. In the grim reality of the POW camps, food was a precious commodity. Rations were meager, often consisting of stale bread, thin soup, and the occasional scrap of meat. The meals were not designed to nourish the prisoners, but to keep them alive, and even that was a tenuous promise. For many of the women, surviving the physical deprivation of food was only half the battle. The emotional toll of captivity, especially in the face of constant uncertainty and despair, was far greater. In this context, food took on a more profound significance. It wasn't just about what was being eaten, it was about how food served as a source of hope, connection, and even identity. One of the most significant ways that food functioned as a lifeline for these women was through its ability to evoke memories of home. Many of the German women in the POW camps had been separated from their families, often for years at a time. The camps, which were cold, overcrowded, and poorly maintained, stripped the women of their autonomy and forced them into an environment where they had little control over their lives. Yet, despite the harshness of their new reality, the smell of familiar foods or the taste of an old recipe could transport them back to a time before the war, back to a place of comfort, safety, and love. In the POW camps, the women would often find ways to recreate the foods they remembered from home. These attempts at culinary nostalgia weren't just about satisfying hunger. They were about holding on to their identity, their culture, and their memories. One of the most heartwarming examples of this came from women who, despite their meager rations, would try to make small dishes that reminded them of family gatherings, birthdays, or holidays. Simple ingredients like potatoes, cabbage, or even a scrap of meat became the foundation for recreating the comforting flavors of home. These small acts of cooking were not just about satisfying the physical need for food. They were an attempt to maintain a sense of normalcy in a world turned upside down by war. In some cases, women would go so far as to trade whatever meager resources they had in order to obtain ingredients to make these comfort foods. The act of sharing a simple dish with others became a symbol of solidarity, a way to connect with fellow prisoners who were also struggling to maintain their humanity in the face of overwhelming adversity. Food, in this sense, was not just about survival. It was about survival with dignity. But the emotional power of food wasn't confined to recreating familiar dishes. Sometimes, it was simply the presence of food, any food, that held great significance. The women in the POW camps often had to make do with whatever scraps were available, and even the smallest portion of food could make a world of difference. When a prisoner was lucky enough to receive a parcel of food from the outside world, perhaps a small amount of bread, some dried fruit, or a few cans of vegetables, it was a reminder that there was still compassion in the world. It was a rare gift, one that represented not just nourishment, but the possibility of a future beyond the confines of the camp. For some women, These small food parcels were more than just sustenance. They were a connection to the outside world, a reminder that they had not been forgotten. In a place where every aspect of life was controlled by their captors, food became one of the few things that could offer a sense of autonomy and agency. When a woman was able to share a portion of her food with others, it wasn't just an act of generosity. It was an assertion of her humanity, a refusal to be reduced to a passive victim of the war. The psychological power of food was also evident in the way that it provided a sense of comfort during times of intense stress. For many of the women in the camps, the emotional toll of captivity was as debilitating as the physical suffering. The constant fear of death, the loss of loved ones, and the uncertainty about the future took a heavy toll on their mental health. In these circumstances, food served as a form of emotional self-care. A warm meal, even if it was nothing more than a bowl of watery soup, became a small moment of solace amidst the chaos of war. It was a fleeting comfort, but in a world where little else could be relied upon, it was precious. There were times, too, when food became a symbol of solidarity between the women and their captors. In some POW camps, the women were given extra rations by the camp guards or by local civilians who felt compassion for their plight. These moments of generosity were rare, but they had a profound impact on the women. The act of receiving food from someone who was supposed to be their enemy challenged a notion of total dehumanization that permeated the war. It reminded the women that there were still good people in the world, even if they were few and far between. One particular instance of this occurred in a British POW camp, where a group of German female prisoners was given a shipment of food from local civilians. The women, who had been surviving on minimal rations for months, were overjoyed by the unexpected delivery. It wasn't much, just a few crates of vegetables, bread, and canned goods, but to the women, it was a lifeline. The food didn't just nourish them physically. It provided them with a sense of dignity, reminding them that they were still worthy of kindness and care. These moments of unexpected generosity were crucial for the women's survival, both physically and emotionally. The emotional and psychological significance of food was not just confined to the prisoners. For the soldiers and guards who witnessed these small acts of kindness, food became a way to see the humanity in others. In the midst of a war that dehumanized everyone involved, the sharing of food was a reminder that the people on both sides of the conflict were, at their core, human beings. It was a fleeting moment of connection in a world that had been torn apart by violence and hatred. As the war dragged on and the conditions in the POW camps worsened, the importance of food continued to grow. For many of the women, the prospect of being fed, even just once a day, was the difference between life and death. The physical and emotional toll of captivity left them vulnerable to disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Without food, the women had little chance of survival. But with food, they had a glimmer of hope, a reminder that they could endure, that they could hold on to their humanity and their will to live. In the end, the role of food in the survival of these women goes beyond its nutritional value. It was a source of connection, comfort, and resistance, a way for the women to maintain their dignity and solidarity in the face of overwhelming adversity. Food became a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, a way to hold on to hope when everything else seemed lost. For the German female POWs, food was not just a means of survival. It was a testament to their strength, their solidarity, and their ability to endure in the face of unimaginable hardship. The psychological power of food during wartime is something that we often overlook. In the modern world, food is an everyday necessity, and it's easy to take it for granted. But for those who have experienced war, food takes on a whole new meaning. It becomes a symbol of life, of survival, and of the human spirit's ability to persevere even in the most dire of circumstances. The comfort food that sustained the German female POWs during World War II was more than just a meal. It was a lifeline, a way to hold on to their humanity and their will to survive. The simple, everyday act of eating, which we often take for granted, was transformed into something much deeper during World War II for the German female prisoners of war, POWs. Food was not just a means of survival for these women. It was a symbol of hope, connection, and ultimately a reminder of their strength and humanity. As they endured the physical and psychological toll of captivity, the impact of food went far beyond satisfying hunger. It became a means of coping with the profound loss and trauma they faced every day. Food not only nourished their bodies, but also their spirits, allowing them to resist the forces of dehumanization and despair that sought to break them. In this part of the story, we will look at the personal impact of food for the women in the camps, how it became not just a survival tool, but a central part of their emotional and psychological resilience. We will explore how food facilitated bonding, created moments of solidarity, and helped maintain a sense of identity and dignity even when everything else seemed lost. Survival through shared meals in the oppressive and isolating environment of the POW camps, where daily survival was a matter of scraping by, food became a symbol of connection. The women, isolated from the rest of the world, often found solace in shared meals. Even when the portions were small, sharing what little food they had left helped maintain an essential human bond, something that war and captivity could not easily take away. This is perhaps best captured by the many stories of women gathering together to divide their meager rations, pooling what they had in order to provide for each other. One particularly moving account comes from a group of women imprisoned in a British POW camp. The conditions were horrendous: overcrowded barracks, inadequate medical care, and minimal food. Yet, despite these hardships, the women managed to form a tight-knit community. Every evening, they would gather around their small bunks, and the small bits of food they had saved throughout the day were carefully shared. This ritual of breaking bread together became more than just an act of sharing. It became a vital lifeline, a reminder that they were still human, still capable of showing compassion in the face of unspeakable suffering. It wasn't the food itself that mattered most. It was the solidarity that came with it. These shared meals allowed the women to preserve a sense of normalcy, to maintain a semblance of family and community in an environment that had stripped them of both. Despite the isolation of being far from home, food became the bridge between the past and the present. It offered a chance to talk, to laugh, and to reminisce. For a few brief moments, the horrors of war and captivity faded, and these women could pretend, if only for a while, that they were back home, with loved ones by their side, enjoying a simple family meal. The role of food in maintaining identity, one of the most powerful aspects of food in the POW camps, was its role in preserving the women's sense of identity. For the prisoners, their cultural heritage and memories of home were often all they had left. They had been torn from their families, their homes, and their lives, and were thrust into an uncertain future, unsure of whether they would ever see their loved ones again. But despite the overwhelming adversity they faced, these women clung to their past, holding on to their cultural practices and traditions. Food played an integral role in this process. The women in the camps would often try to recreate the dishes they remembered from their home countries, attempting to keep alive the tastes and smells of a world that seemed so far away. These culinary traditions, passed down through generations, became a source of comfort and resistance. The act of cooking, even with limited ingredients, was a way to retain a part of themselves, a piece of their culture, amid the chaos of captivity. In one story, a group of women in a Soviet POW camp managed to salvage enough flour to make a traditional German rye bread. The bread was far from the high-quality loaves they would have enjoyed before the war, but it was enough to bring a sense of home to the camp. As the women kneaded the dough, they shared stories of their mothers and grandmothers, reminiscing about the bread they had eaten as children. It wasn't just about eating. It was about keeping alive the memories of life before the war, a life that seemed increasingly distant with every passing day. Such acts of culinary rebellion were not without risk. In many cases, the women had to find creative ways to obtain the ingredients they needed to make these foods. Rations were meager, and there was little to spare. Yet, despite these challenges, the women found ways to make do. They would trade small items with other prisoners, or even with the camp guards, hoping to acquire a few scraps of vegetables or a morsel of meat. These exchanges were often risky, as the prisoners could be punished for attempting to barter, but the desire to maintain their cultural identity through food made the risk worth it. The emotional power of food in wartime. Food's emotional significance during wartime cannot be overstated. For these women, the scarcity of food was a constant reminder of their vulnerability. Yet at the same time, it was also a constant reminder of their resilience. The emotional power of food was not just in the comfort it provided, but in the sense of agency it gave them. Even when everything else was beyond their control, the women could still control how they experienced food. They could choose to share it, to prepare it, and to savor it in moments of quiet defiance. Perhaps one of the most poignant examples of this came when women in a French POW camp were unexpectedly given a small parcel of food by the local villagers. The parcel contained just a few loaves of bread, a handful of potatoes, and some dried meat. For the women, this simple gift was nothing short of life-changing. The meal they shared that night was not just a chance to satisfy their hunger. It was a reminder that, even in the midst of war, kindness and compassion still existed. It was an act of solidarity that transcended the barriers of enemy lines, one that gave the women a renewed sense of purpose and hope. But it wasn't just about physical sustenance. These moments of shared food gave the women the emotional strength to face another day in captivity. They had not been forgotten. They were still seen, still worthy of care, and still deserving of something as basic as a warm meal. The emotional impact of these moments was immeasurable. In a place where despair was the norm, food became a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even in the darkest times. The enduring bonds of food, one of the most enduring legacies of food in the POW camps, was the way it fostered deep emotional connections between the women. The shared experience of hunger, deprivation, and survival forged bonds that lasted well beyond the war. Many of the women who had been in the camps remained close friends for the rest of their lives, united by the experiences they had endured together. Food, in this context, wasn't just about survival. It was about creating memories, building relationships, and finding strength in each other. When the war finally ended, many of the women returned to their home countries, but the memories of their time together in the camps and the shared meals that had sustained them stayed with them. They would often meet years later, sharing stories of their captivity and recounting the small meals that had kept them going. Those meals, in many ways, had become symbols of their survival, representing not just the food they ate, but the friendship, solidarity, and strength they had found in each other. Even after the war, food remained an important part of their lives. Many of the women would recreate the dishes they had made in the camps, using the same ingredients they had used to survive. The recipes became a way to honor the memory of their time together and the strength they had drawn from one another. Food, in this sense, had become a symbol of resilience, a way to preserve the connections they had made in the darkest of times. The role of food in collective healing. Food also played a critical role in the healing process for many of the women after the war. The trauma of captivity, both physical and psychological, was immense, and for many of the survivors, the memories of the horrors they had endured stayed with them for the rest of their lives. But food, as both a psychological and physical tool, helped to begin the healing process. The act of eating, especially when shared with others, became a way to reclaim their lives, to reconnect with the parts of themselves that had been lost during the war. The post-war years were not easy for these women. Many struggled with physical ailments caused by malnutrition, and many had to rebuild their lives from the ground up. Yet, in the comfort of shared meal, they found a sense of healing. Food became a way to process the pain, to rebuild relationships, and to celebrate the resilience that had seen them through the darkest days of their lives. In the end, the personal impact of food on the German female POWs was far-reaching. It was not just about surviving. It was about maintaining dignity, solidarity, and hope. Food was more than just a means to sustain life. It was a vital source of emotional nourishment. It allowed these women to resist the dehumanizing effects of captivity, to hold on to their humanity, and to build connections that would last a lifetime. Food was not just something they ate. It was something that shaped their survival, their relationships, and their legacy.